Yo, so we're about to start a new thing where I do a weekly live streaming podcast, but I was recently told by DLF, despite asking weeks ago about maybe doing some weekly content, and we already have a lot of AMAs or resources that are weekly live streaming AMAs. So I can't do an AMA. So instead, this is more of a Dynasty reaction podcast, what's just happened or what's happening right now and how it might affect Dynasty. But you know what? I'm better and frankly prettier than all those guys. So if you have questions, ask them. Like Addison Hayes refused to come on the show tonight. So like he's not here. He can't stop me. Like his arms would have to be really, really long to reach me here in Kentucky from where I'm a native. Obviously, you can tell by the accent. And so like, if you happen to ask a question, I can't, maybe not answer it. So yeah, welcome in. This is a weekly grind, DLF weekly grind. Right now we're on my channel, if you're wondering, because we haven't set up me being on DLS channel. We'll probably switch over by next week. I'll try and download and upload the video to my own channel as well, I guess, because I like my channel pretty well, even though DLS channel is obviously superior. And yeah, knuckle in. Game start tomorrow. Season's here. Let's get it started. Yeah, there's no news. It's pre-week one. Nothing has happened. I would say I'm seeing a lot about it's maybe Dimey Brown season now, or Dimey, or however you actually say names. And all I can say to that is, you don't like Dimey Brown if you think now is Dimey Brown season because Curtis Samuel might miss. Like maybe it's product of being wide receiver orientated in Dynasty, but I like more upside than that. And if I like Dimey Brown, which I do, is my highest rostered rookie, then I like him to have higher upside than maybe if Curtis Samuel isn't there, he can do something. And I do. And so therefore I like Dimey Brown just as much as I did before. Obviously it's sad to hear that Curtis Samuel's injured and isn't going to play this season. He's having a pretty good NFL career in his own right. And a few people like Zach Reed of the Dynasty Dummies podcast are big fans. And so that was interesting to me. But I just think Dimey Brown had a higher ceiling in my estimation for that. So like, if his value's gone up, it's actually a pretty good. If you can get a first for Dimey Brown, you trade it. If you can't, then you just keep Dimey Brown. I think he had higher upside than a Curtis Samuel injury, maybe leading to opportunity, because that's not how targets work. Maybe makes sense. Outside of that, Austin Eckler's limping around, Noah Fant's limping around. I don't think any of this is particularly actionable. The Austin Eckler news does mean there's an interesting backup running situation over there in Charger land. I don't know who to roster. I'm rostering Joshua Kelly. I'm rostering Justin Jefferson in a few leagues. Justin Jefferson maybe has higher upside. He's had a higher receiving target share in his career so far than someone like Joshua Kelly. But Joshua Kelly's had bigger opportunity shares where he tends to occupy a bigger rushing workload as a running back too. I think it's Justin Jackson would be the better handcuff, but I go back and forth by myself. So I don't know if that matters at all, really. Both of them should really be rostered. AJ Brown is resting, which is fine. I wouldn't be too worried. Mecole Hardman is limited in practice. Maybe pushing out, like we can get another year of sell Mecole Hardman, because there are just excuses rolling in for him. Even before the season starts, like I can't express enough how you would have been better off selling Mecole Hardman at literally every point into his career to this point, especially since he was a bad rookie prospect and he shouldn't have been drafted unless it was to trade him the minute there was hype, and there's been nothing but hype. Kind of recently, Justice Hill went down to IR, making the Ravens running backfield even a bit more of a mess. I think this has been covered over the last week fairly well, though. Like Tyson Williams is someone to roster as every potential running back on a decent depth chart is. And I think he's probably one of the few that's happened in the last few weeks that might have been available on a lot of dynasty waiver wires because he was undrafted and behind other backs. And so I've tried to add him in waivers this week as they've run. But I think the Ravens backfield just isn't where you should be looking for upside. It's more, if you're wide receiver focused like me, those guys have value. They might produce some usable weeks if they get more of a workload because of running backs in front of them going down. But the only reason to like J.K. Dobbins more than that was because he's shown to be a proficient runner in a fairly limited offense. I mean, Lamar Jackson soaks up so much of that offensive production that there's just no room. But J.K. Dobbins had been good enough that we thought maybe he could live on efficiency. Like, no one else can do that. It's not the right team to shoot for running back depth if you're really looking for upside. So they're really only interesting, both Justice Hill and now Tyson Williams. If you're looking for usable weeks because your team's more constructed, more built around the wide receiver, if you've got Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins and Stephon Diggs, those are the sort of teams that I imagine your running back depth looks a little thinner and where they might have more value. And so they creep over the value line for you. But definitely not. Not even J.K. Dobbins was going to hit that ceiling, probably. Where he was going, and neither Gus Edwards or Tyson Williams or Trent I've forgotten his name. Trenton Cannon, right? Trenton Cannon, whatever. They just added him to the running back depth chart. Le'Veon Bell's gone to the practice squad. I actually think Le'Veon Bell makes a more interesting deep add if you are looking for upside, because he's a player who's shown some level of upside, even in recent history, and obviously the maximum amount of upside back when he was the most consistently high-level productive running back we've seen since I knew that the game of football existed anyway. And a lot of people are making fun of that, but it's free. It's off the waiver wire. He's on a practice squad. If you are desperate enough at running back, I think he's worth an add. I added him in Scott Fishbowl, then dropped him because immediately I looked at everyone else's drops. And frankly, there were more interesting players on the waiver wire after everyone made their drops. And so I ended up dropping Le'Veon Bell straight away. But I don't think it's a terrible thing to add him if you're looking for upside at the running back position rather than usable weeks. Hey, AM, how you doing? That was just a hat tip. That's not an AMA at all. I can't respond to that. All right. Other dynasty takeaways. All right. So who we got tomorrow? Who's actually the game? I don't know. I'd kind of just wait for the stats to populate and then wait for the offseason to come back around. But I think it's Tampa Bay, is it not? Yeah, Tampa Bay versus Dallas. Yeah, I think this is going to, we only really have last season and any adjustments we want to make based on off-season moves to judge matchups, which is always terrible. Strength of schedules are just in general not worth trusting. But as long as we're looking, Tampa Bay defense looks to tear up Dak Prescott a little more than we might like. He's already a little over-projected, despite being a top 5 QB in all seasons he started for at least 12 games. Because of a small sample track from last season, I don't think he's going to pass nearly as much as we think he was, or some think he will be. But I still think he's definitely a top 12 QB. He has top 5 in his range of outcomes. But Tampa Bay isn't the best start to that run because the Tampa Bay defense was allowing extra volume last year in the passing game, but it was producing sub-average based on their opponents' points. In other words, they were underperforming what they typically do in an expected points or fantasy points over expected projection based on RotoViz's model. In other words, people were passing more because Tampa Bay was scoring on them, but they were not seeing greater efficiency. They're actually seeing lower efficiency. And so we suspect Tampa Bay to be a pretty tough matchup for Dak, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper. Obviously, you have to start them week 1 unless you're in the second year of your dynasty team and you've managed to stack up wide receivers and you can replace Amari Cooper or Michael Gallup with Stephon Diggs or DeAndre Hopkins or someone you bought at a slight discount last year or even this offseason. But assuming startups, I think you probably have your starting wide receivers locked in, and I don't think you can sit Dallas wide receivers. I just don't, but it might be a tougher matchup. As far as Tampa Bay versus Dallas hasn't been offering much resistance. We're expecting slightly lower production from Tom Brady this year as opposed to last year. But this year is going to be kind of wild anyway, with COVID still actually being a thing and actually being slightly worse. So it's a little hard to know exactly, but I do think Tampa Bay production should be fairly good. And we'll get an answer pretty quickly to the Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, and Antonio Brown trio. Since Antonio Brown joined the team last year, Basically, Antonio Brown led in all volume metrics and also production metrics from that point on, with Chris Godwin a very close second. It was really Mike Evans who saw the biggest decrease. And some who like to listen or like to make a narrative around that, it's all about Tom Brady's arm. I think Tom Brady can still make the ball down the field, especially when he wants to. He's going to do it more selectively just because he's a better quarterback and also because he is slightly older and maybe he's losing some of that arm power. But I still think Mike Evans is a reasonable starter. If you have him rostered, I wouldn't panic too hard. But week one, especially week one, probably going to get a lot of answers to that triumvirate of wide receivers and how that's going to shake out now with Antonio Brown on the team week one. However, I do remember a few weeks ago, there was a news report about Antonio Brown already being pushed off the practice field. So I don't know. Maybe Mike Evans can get a little hope if Antonio Brown continues that kind of behavior, I guess. But I can't quite remember what that was for. AMC, Super Bowl champs are going to be dethroned week one. I don't know about that. It's not so much about Dak and the offense. I think they're going to have to pass more, which is positive, but you should expect them to struggle against that defense. With extra volume and those level of wide receivers, certainly. I think New England. I think Tampa Bay walk away with a win, but it could be a pretty interesting game. I forget what the line is on it in terms of Vegas, but I think it's a pretty high-scoring game. Yeah. Let's see. They're expecting Tampa Bay to score 29.8 points, which is a really high production output for a weekly basis, and gets essentially 3 touchdowns. Which we would divide based on last season and also off-season production to 2 receiving touchdowns. So again, if one of them's long, it goes to Mike Evans, and it might be an interesting desperation start. I think he's a lot harder to start than Antonio Brown or Chris Godwin, personally. As far as Dallas goes, I think Dallas is the underdog in that game. And that defense, just based on 2020, obviously, defenses can literally flip ranks and performances from one season to the next, and they're more likely to flip to the exact opposite than they are to marginally increase as well. We can talk to an IDP guy to get a more accurate idea of that, but Vegas right now expects them to be beat pretty soundly. Dallas has a 21.8 projection, so beaten by more than a touchdown quite easily, factoring in field goals there, and only get 2 touchdowns total, one of them receiving. Again, Mari Cooper is going to be my favorite for that. No matter how much I like Gallup and CeeDee Lamb, Mari Cooper is just a volume leader there. Can you predict Kyle Pitts' week 1 stat line? I think we've got a pretty good idea of Kyle Pitts right now. Look, his upside, even week 1, his upside projection is probably Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce this year, not last year, because last year he was outperforming tight end performances by too drastic of a rate. But I can tell you what I have him down for. How about I do that? I didn't realize I had my projections sitting up here. Let's see. Kyle Pitts week 1. This is just based on my Vegas model, which is meant to be predicting what Vegas says much more than I think. But they've got him down for 50 receiving yards and 1 touchdown, being a top 5 tight end that week. I think that's pretty reasonable. I think that's pretty reasonable based on the prospect we think Kyle Pitts is, and the game line he's actually in. And that's actually fairly consistent. Looking at 4 different ranking and projections agencies, there's actually a fairly good consistency in his overall positional rank. I have him ranked 5th, and other projection outfits have him in that range as well, to an incredibly stable degree, which to me means there's a greater amount of certainty, almost a consensus that Kyle Pitts is a top 5 tight end week 1. Let's see. I can actually tell you exactly where they're putting them because I have that stuff. Kyle Pitts, yeah, he's ranked anywhere from tight end 5 to tight end 7, only two, including mine. Of the 4, one of them is mine, and then there are only 2 that have him outside the top 5. One has him 6, one has him 7, tight end 6 and tight end 7. So yeah, pretty much everyone's expecting a pretty good performance out the gate from Atlanta tight end Kyle Pitts week 1. I think he's a starter, unless you have Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, or George Kittle. I think you're starting Kyle Pitts. Hopefully that answers it. Need to find a way to get music in. I keep saying that, but then I remember I'm not allowed to have music because it's copyrighted. Yeah, it's very average, but that's a top 5 performance for a tight end in my weekly projections anyway. 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Yeah, that might be a little too hot. It might be a little too hot. No, I can't go with you on that. I'm still betting in the under on Kyle Pitts in general. I understand the value. You can't really lose out on value. We're crazy enough from in Dynasty that he almost can't fall too far, but it did happen to Evan Ingram, but he wasn't this highly touted. So in Dynasty, he's rock solid value proposition. In terms of production, there's such a wide range of outcomes for Kyle Pitts as a rookie tight end. And saying he's a wide receiver doesn't make it better. In fact, it makes it worse. If he's used like a wide receiver, I think we might be distinctly disappointed with his output in year 1 or year 2 or year 3. We're hoping he's a tight end. Now, he could be a Jimmy Graham tight end. He could be who's used much more of a receiver than a blocker. He could also be a Zach Ertz tight end who plays wide receiver more than blocker, but both of them were playing very much tight end roles. They're on the field when tight ends are meant to be on the field, not playing wide receiver position with a different designation. Jordan Reed, too. He was another one who's much more of a receiver than a blocker, but we really need him to play tight end, not different wide receiver. And that's not going to be where production comes from. He's a little undersized, but so are those others I mentioned were all over 250. And the only undersized tight end with a level of production we're looking at that, again, played tight end, not different wide receiver, but also put up the production we were kind of looking for was Evan Ingram. I think he's Evan Ingram the second, but at a higher value. Makes a great value bet, especially if you're getting him in rookie drafts. But production-wise, I'm still kind of betting the under. 50 on a touchdown. I'm giving you top 5. I don't know what to tell you. I'm not projecting many tight ends for 100 touchdowns, 100 yards and 1 touchdown any week, let alone week 1. All right. Is there any other news this week? Any other daily news to grind? I don't think so. There's really not much going on from a dynasty landscape this week. I mean, someone's putting out a coach blurb about Kadarius Toney. If there's a value increase, I would sell that fella or trade him away in dynasty, obviously. That's about it. I will say DeAndre Swift, when he's been in the news burbs, Detroit running back, just in case you didn't know, it's largely been negative. It's led to a great deal of value on him, especially if you're drafting this year, if your startup happened, and I think that's solid. Jamal Williams is usually the only other running back spoken of, but I think Jefferson, he's a rookie, low drafted and everything else, but he was decently productive at a fairly decent conference. I haven't heard a peep out of him, but he's had a solid camp, I would say. And I just added him in a few places that I didn't already draft him, like in my 4th, 5th round of rookie drafts. Just if there is uncertainty in Detroit's running back depth chart, and DeAndre Swift isn't fully healthy, Jamal Williams is probably the guy everyone's looking for, but I think Jefferson is an interesting look. Again, if you're desperately seeking any usable or upside running backs, I think that has some level of value on the back end of your bench. But honestly, I don't know for injuries, but I think the news on Swift might be mostly exaggerated. You know what I mean? Don't know what I mean? Okay, that's where I'm at. All right, other news. I meant to have Dynasty Outhouse with me, but he quit on me because his wife says she doesn't like me, I believe was the story, and honestly can't blame her. And he told me that today, so I wasn't able to find a replacement. This podcast is meant to have at least some weeks another member from the DLF crew. Yeah, let's go with crew. And for me to bounce and talk about dynasty takeaways from weekly events during the NFL season. So hopefully they'll be along. But honestly, we're just better off with me. Anyway, I will say the last time I had a DLF co-host, he literally quit the game to take up golf more seriously. So maybe I'm just cursed. Maybe that's why they won't tune in. I don't know. Shout out to Jake, who's definitely not watching. All right. Let me do game predictions. It's the only thing I can think of. That's more week to week than anything else. But what else are we going to do? With a lack of dynasty news on the horizon, we're going to have to go what will we go for. Right now, consensus rank has Tom Brady as a top 8 quarterback play. So if you're considering starting and sit him, he's very much in the tier 2 or 3 start range. Dak Prescott is borderline start worthy, again, just because of that Tampa Bay defense. Obviously, depending on how far along you are in your dynasty league, you kind of have to start Dak Prescott in certain situations. And honestly, I wouldn't fear it. I'd just be aware it might not be the best start to his comeback career. But it is Dak Prescott, so you never know. Consensus has my consensus, as far as I'm tracking, has Ezekiel Elliott as running or the flex rank 14, which means he's a definite starter in most leagues. Not that you needed to hear that. I'm actually the lowest on him. PF has him at 8, 4-4 has him at running back 13. Rotoviz has him at like running back 17, but I think that's on the air because they don't have week-to-week projections yet. I have him week 1 running back 19, just based on a very low game production. He's an away running back on an underdog team, which we think they'll be passing more. Again, that's what that defense allowed last year. Rather than efficiency, they did allow extra volume as teams tried to catch up. So we might have a rough week 1 as well. Dallas in general. Ronald Jones, and just a shout out, just in case you're like John Bosch out there and you've got Mike Davis sitting on your bench, where the likes of Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette are starting for you, just maybe switch that out. I can't promise you. I just think Mike Davis has a better upside projection or even medium projection than Leonard Fournette or Ronald Jones this week. They're ranking 31 and 32 as a flex starter. So, yeah, they're flex worthy, but they're not running back 2 starters. If you have another option like Mike Davis, and that's another question we had this offseason, will be probably answered pretty quickly week 1. We hope these things get answered quickly. Anyway, Gronkowski's projecting as a 17th start sit tight end. So essentially, you can't start him week 1 unless you're in desperation mode. Despite what Tom Brady says, projections are not buying it. Everyone has OJ Howard ranked outside the top 28 tight ends. And so he'd be a very difficult start unless you're really shooting for upside and believing the word of Tom Brady. Absolutely. Chris Godwin's ranked outside the wide receiver 17 by 3 or 4 different projection outfits, including myself. Only Rotoviz on a season-long basis has Chris Godwin in the top 12 this week. Mike Evans is a little further out from that. Most people are expecting, or most projection services I'm looking at are expecting Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin to be the best starters in that wide receiver car week over week. Although Mike Evans has that ultimate range of outcomes where he can catch 100 yards on a touchdown in a single play. And I still think Tom Brady can hit him. CeeDee Lamb is just not a starter this week. I mean, I'm saying all I've seen, and I hope he can. I mean, individually, just looking at the player that CeeDee Lamb is, I believe he can beat the odds. In that most players in his situation that were good, not just most players, but most players who are exceptionally good, to have multiple fantasy relevant seasons within their first 3 or 4 years and would not hit the top 12 this year. Now, CeeDee Lamb is a different kind of fish. So just looking at CeeDee Lamb, I can understand why people want to project him in the top 12 this year or for this week or whatever else. But until he's very much, especially in Dynasty on it, until I see him beat the odds, he's sitting on my bench, and Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup are actually more likely to start, or Michael Gallup's more likely to be rostered because of his investment cost. Although I did write for DLF this season that we should probably buy CeeDee Lamb now rather than later. While he is overpriced, I don't think he's going to get cheaper just based on evaluating that player themselves. I think he's for real. I think he's very much for real, and so his value arc should definitely be going up for the next few years, making this the lowest point we'll see in a while, unless he got hurt. And let's not even think about that. Having said that, because 3 out of the 4 outside of me are projecting CeeDee Lamb to finish higher than Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb projects as a better start sit. I would go the other way. I would start Amari Cooper over CeeDee Lamb if I had the option of both, or if I had Amari Cooper sitting on my bench, I'd strongly consider starting him over most other wide receivers. Consensus start sit rank has him in the top 24, so it's unlikely. Well, not unlikely in a dynasty league, you can easily stack up 3 or 4 top 12 prospects, but Amari Cooper is going to be a start most weeks on most teams. So I think you should take a look at him again, just in case you're fading him because you think it's going to go to CeeDee Lamb. I think week 1 isn't the week to assume that, and we'll reassess after that. Again, I'm actually the lowest on Antonio Brown week 1. I have him ranked wide receiver 39, just expecting a slow start, I guess, or Vegas is expecting a slow start. Everyone else has him ranked inside the top 24. So I'd start Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and then Antonio Brown in that order. Michael Gallup coming soon after them. Hopefully you have some of those choices on your bench, so that's not just words that are of no use to you. But it illustrates some of my process on how I think or how I approach week 1. It's literally expect week 1 to remind us that rookies are rookies, that veterans are veterans, especially in an uncertain season where they have had more practice as an offense just across the board this year. We should expect Dallas to be throwing more, which is good, but we should expect some level of difficulty because Tampa Bay has offered up a lot of resistance to beating or performing efficiently against them. I think they have a good defense, but that's just someone who literally couldn't name you a defensive player outside of... No, I got nothing. So definitely check with more strength of schedule oriented people or IDP people. We'll talk about the cornerbacks, I guess. But just based on what they did last year, I think that defense offers a lot of resistance to the passing game, but they are allowing excessive volume. And I think that's just because competing against Tampa Bay last year, teams had to throw more than they typically would or did on average. And since that's what we have to base things on for this year, that's kind of how I'm expecting this game to play out. Dak Prescott is definitely someone you have to start in most situations, but I don't know, it might be a rough look. And that brings me back to Tom Brady. I think he's less startable generally than Dak Prescott, where that team's probably going to operate more efficiently against that defense. He's probably at least a top 8 starter. Very few quarterbacks I'd sit for him this week. But no, the ceiling is somewhat muted since I don't think the defense is probably going to be holding Dallas back a little bit more than they're not going to have to score all 3 of those touchdowns in the receiving game that Vegas is suggesting, or our offseason projections on Vegas numbers is projecting. Which, again, I know I said I'd sit Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette over Mike Davis, but there are very few running backs I think could be sitting inside that starter range of top 12 this week, and that Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette wouldn't start over because we might see a heavier output from the rushing game if the defense holds Dallas back a little more and Tom Brady's Tampa Bay Buccaneers are leading. Yeah, general idea is that the rushing game is going to get a little bit of work there. As far as the split between the two goes, I favor Ronald Jones over Leonard Fournette, and so does everyone except RotoViz on a seasonal league basis. So I don't know. I can't see their week 1 projections yet. I don't even know if they're going to put them out. So I just included their season-long outputs. All right. So questions, problems. I don't think there's much dynasty news to go over or takeaways from this. I could and want to talk about the value of wide receiver to running back, as we've been talking about it on Twitter this week. That's a big post there, AMC. What's this? This is a team with picks included. All right, who do I start? 10-team PPR Superflex League. All right, let's see. I'd start Dak Prescott for sure on Lamar Jackson. I'm assuming that's Lamar Jackson over Wentz and Darnold. That's easy. McCaffrey and Kamara are your starters. At running back, unless you're starting 3, just going to assume you're starting 2. Terry McLaurin. That's a difficult wide receiver. See, this is the problem with wide receiver. How many wide receivers you're starting? 3. AJ Brown. I think you've got it listed in the right order here. I would start AJ Brown. I'd start Terry McLaurin. I'd start Amari Cooper. Sutton, I would wait to see. He's definitely a starter in most situations, not in your situation. I just want to see, since you have the option of playing Terry McLaurin instead of Courtland Sutton, I think you wait to see how Teddy Bridgewater, Jerry Jeudy, and Courtland Sutton are going to work that out, because you simply don't have to start them. But let me try this. Courtland Sutton, Cooper. Who else was it? Courtland Sutton, Murray Cooper, Terry McLaurin. Yeah, definitely sitting Juju and Samuel and Rager and Edwards. None of them are goes. For week one, where you have this receiving core anyway. AJ Brown. Yeah, it's AJ Brown, Terry McLaurin, and Amari Cooper. Colin sits at like flex ramp 53 and sits at least 10 spots below Amari Cooper, just using the average of projected finishing ranks across those four different engines, and I have it roughly in that order. I do have Cortland Sutton projected over Amari Cooper right now, but again, I think that's just the noise of expecting of sophomore production from CeeDee Lamb being a little too high. I think Amari Cooper is a safer start with a better floor and a game shootout that does happen tomorrow and has a higher over-under. I think Dallas's team projection of 21 points might be a little lower, like I've been saying. And I just think I would take the extra week to find out more about how Denver's going to work with Terry Bridgewater, Jerry Jeudy, and Cortland Sutton. That's just my opinion. Who else you got in here? Waller, Pitts. You're starting Waller. You're just starting Darren Waller, even if you want to start Kyle Pitts. I can understand it. You do have one flex spot, though. I would stick Sutton or I would stick Pitts in there if you would like. Yeah. There's an argument you could say that you played Gus Edwards over Pitts or over Sutton, just because running back production is a little more stable. There's definitely a better floor there. That's kind of a personal choice. What do you think of your matchup? Do you want to go for floor? Let's put it this way. Gus Edwards is more likely to score you 10 points. Pitts and Cortland Sutton are much more likely to score you 16. But they're also much more likely to score you 5. That's just the difference between wide receiver and running back in a flex spot. And I think you really kind of have to make that decision for yourself. If it was me, week one, I'm probably playing Cortland Sutton just because I already don't feel great about sitting him. And Gus Edwards, I think he might get you 10, but I think that's a pretty hard ceiling. I'm not sure how the touchdowns are going to be divvied up in that offense, obviously, but I'm not sure Gus Edwards will be my favorite to score it if I had to choose. But if you just want the extra break and you want to watch the first game without any added stress, you can just start Gus Edwards. Because Cortland Sutton isn't playing this week either. That's not a good decision maker either. Gus Edwards is flex rank 43, so he actually beats, again, because of that floor, he actually beats out either Cooper or Sutton, depending on which one you want to start. We're projecting him for like 13 points, and I think that's a high median. That's based on my model, which has him at 11 points, which I think sounds a lot fairer. RotoViz has him predicted at 15.2 points per game. But again, that's just based on their seasonal stuff. I think that's a little high. His points per game is going to be a little elevated in the seasonal long look. 444 has him projected at 13.8 points. So we think he's going to I think my interpretation of projections this week is he's going to score between 11 and 13 points. I think Cortland Sutton has a much higher range of outcomes, and I don't think the floor is too bad. Cortland Sutton's going to get you 5-6 points probably no matter what, right? Especially if it's PPR. So I'd be okay shooting for ceiling week one. Why not? Live on the edge and start Sutton over Gus Edwards. But to be clear, Gus Edwards is probably the sensible pick. Just go for your floors. I'm just not going to do it. What does JDMK stand for? JD McKissick, I'm guessing? All right. That's all I got. I was checking Twitter. I am checking Discord as well, just to see. Okay. Lots of posts about Connor's draft, but no actual questions. All right. This show is meant to be an hour long every Wednesday to deal with dynasty takeaways or reactions to weekly NFL events. If you have questions, bring them. Just don't tell Addison Hayes. He'll get real mad. And I'll answer anything else you happen to want. I like the idea of a live streaming podcast. Again, when we move this to the DLF channel, I will produce it secondhand on my own channel, so it will come out after the fact. But it's not going to be pushed to podcast players. It's going to exist on Twitch. It's going to exist, I assume they have a Twitch. It'll exist on my Twitch. And it'll exist on the DLF YouTube channel. Really just for after the waivers run, looking at the waiver wire, see if there's anyone that still might be out there who from a dynasty perspective might have a little more value instead of a week-to-week perspective, assuming that your league mates are doing a pretty good job on the waiver wire. Also takeaways from injuries, performances, trends in opportunity, how rookies are doing so far, just a holistic dynasty look at what's happening on a week-to-week basis. I think that can make for a fun show, especially if I can get some other people on here to talk with me, or I can get you all in the chat to maybe bounce ideas off and talk about the latest events, because I'm definitely not going to be able to keep up with anything or everything at least. And so, yeah, stick around. Come join us every Wednesday. This show should be about an hour. This is going to be less than that, but I like to think I'm only meant to provide half the content. There's meant to be someone else here with me, so half an hour seems reasonable. That's such a cop-out. But I'm assuming we'll live stream for about an hour every Wednesday in season. After obviously it will be after your waivers one. So low-key, long view on what's happening on a weekly basis. I think weekly grind or weekly DLF grind kind of encapsulates that, but let me know. Let me know if there's anything else you want me to include. Someone asked me about DFS. I'm happy to talk about it. I'm not a big DFS player, to be honest, but I got thoughts and theories, and I do listen to a lot of those guys talk, so I'll be happy to answer anything or offer an opinion on any of it. But yeah, it's definitely not a DFS podcast. All right, anything else? Anyone got any questions that we won't tell Addison Hayes about at all? I don't know how long is an appropriate pause. How long is an appropriate pause for that kind of question? Also, let me know what kind of setup you'd like to see. Like, I've got all my sheets and my projections up. I can show you those instead of my big ugly face if you prefer. Something like this, but obviously more prepared, because this is just the view I was putting on it. Or it can just be like this. I don't know, just shitting out questions now. All right. Thanks for coming in to the chat here, AMC Squirt. Honestly, holding up the chat all by yourself, really appreciate it. We're on after the open bar now. We managed to move off that Tuesday spot, so they get 9:30-ish all to themselves. And really appreciate you checking it out. I'll talk to you again next week after we see the first round of NFL games. I'm actually really excited about it. Good luck this week. DM me on Twitter, or just at me on Twitter at Pahowdy anytime you want to add something, want to ask something to put on this show, or just about your weekly lineup. I'm happy to try and talk to you about it. Or hit me up in the Patreon Discord as always. Really appreciate it, and I'll see you again next week, every Wednesday, baby. Every Wednesday, right? Yeah, that sounds about right. I think that's it. I think that's all I got. All right. Appreciate it. See you next week. Bye.